Thank you, Dorothy. Our next panelist is Steve Doherty. Steve was elected to the Senate in 1990 and served through 2001. During his tenure, he also served as the Senate Minority Leader. He's been the chairman of the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Commission and a senior advisor for the Northwest for the U.S. Secretary of Interior. Please welcome Steve Doherty.
Thanks, Holly, and it's good to be here. And after listening to Dorothy Bradley, I again will be plagued with the nightmares and the dreams of what our state would be if she would have been Montana's first governor. Yeah. And the nightmare may be because the other guy won. So, it's an amazing thing to be here because in my misspent youth, I was a community organizer. And I first came to the Montana Legislature in 1975. I grew up in Great Falls. I went to school back east, and I don't know if you remember, Dorothy, but for my senior thesis, I wrote about strip mining in Montana. And we communicated back and forth then. And I came to the exact amazing conclusion that we needed a moratorium. As did Senator Mansfield, as did Senator Metcalf at that time. It didn't happen, but that discussion about are we going to control our own future in Montana is one that had never occurred. Never. It wasn't allowed. And it was an amazing time after the adoption of the Constitution. And when I came to Helena during that time, I got to work with some incredible people, Dorothy among them, but also some people, and there are two who stand out, from our university system at Missoula, Ross Toole and Clancy Gordon. Ross, who prodded us and begged us, Republican and Democrat alike, to do the right thing, to do what Montanans wanted instead of absentee landlords. So here I am, now approaching geezerhood, and having passed through curmudgeon, never believing that I would be one of the people who might sit up here and talk about what happened in the good old bad old days. So Lawrence and I served together in the 1990s, and since I go first and he goes second, the admonition about those who write history are the people who live the longest, or maybe speak second, may be true. Just a question. You know, the coal tax debate was an incredible thing. And Ted Schwinden's reduction of the coal tax from 30% to 15%, if the coal companies met a certain production level, you know, there were Democrats who wanted to march on Ted's house with pitchforks and burning flames. I don't know if we could pass a coal tax now in Montana. Think of that. All the fights that people have about TSEP and where the money is going to go and all those things that occur, whether it's going to the libraries or whether it's going to rural areas or who's getting it and is MSU going to use it and siphon it off and build Romney Hall or what? None of those discussions occur without a coal tax. None of them. Would it pass now? Do we have leaders in Montana who would carry that bill? No. That's just something that I thought about. And the other thing, well, just mentioning Dorothy mentioning the water reservation in Yellowstone. one of my first jobs was to live in Glendive for 2 years, which I greatly enjoyed. There's some great bird hunting there. But I worked with Lower Yellowstone irrigators in Sydney and on up into Miles City. And if it wouldn't have been for the agricultural people in eastern Montana saying, we need in-stream flow so our pumps don't suck air, we wouldn't have gotten the water reservation system through. It was a concerted effort of conservationists, of irrigators, of people who love the Yellowstone. But the work of agricultural people, I think, completely legitimized and empowered those seeking the policy changes to make in-stream flows a reality and to guard Montana's water, because it's still flowing out, but we have in-stream flow as a reserved waterway. So, what happened in the 1990s? Well, I think one of the things, and it's amazing to follow Dorothy after this, we hadn't arranged this at all, but I think one of the things that happened was that the legislature, and you know, when you're in the legislature, you think you're going to do great things, and you know, it's all going to be good. Well, it isn't. One of the things is that each legislature has a personality, and how the legislature is going to work and work with the governor, work against the governor. I never served with a Democratic governor. I served with Republican governors. I never had a bill vetoed that actually got through. But I think one of the earmarks of the 1990s legislatures was that we took it upon ourselves to micromanage the managers. And if you look at the legislation that was passed, you will find that the legislature decided that, by God, we're going to do science. Now that's a scary proposition, or if you haven't been to the Montana legislature, you need to go and you'll find out that we're no smarter than the rest of the world. And we may not be a whole lot smarter than scientists and managers who work at their jobs in good faith, trying to put into effect the policies that we've put together. But we micromanaged water. We determined mixing zones. We determined nutrient levels. We said what you could and couldn't consider in MIPA. Now, some of those are policy issues and completely legitimate, but we set arsenic levels. We determined it'd be a hell of a good idea to deregulate electricity in Montana. And we know how that turned out. If you want to talk about managing dams, hydropower, just the gift that we have in Montana of hydropower, we get to buy them twice now. The first time, through our rates, and then it was sold to somebody, the Pennsylvania Power and Light, and then it was sold to somebody, and then we finally get to buy it back from Northwestern Energy. So we, and I'm sure Lawrence will be able to talk about mixing zones and possibly confess his sins. But he explained to me earlier that Norwegians don't sin, so, which is the best comeback I've ever heard. So the thing with mixing zones that I could never understand is that you have a point source of pollution. Okay, a pipe, I get that. But you have a point source. So why can't you regulate it coming out of the point source? Non-point source, I understand. I get that, you know. And ag folks probably never need to worry about non-point source pollution, except if you're going to have an intensely confined operation, like they have back east, which we don't want to follow. So, but we set mixing zones. But the important point is, we, the legislature, micromanage science. Good or bad, I think we did. The second thing that I want to talk about is compacts. It's the only way anything is ever going to get done in water from here on out. I just met Chaz Vincent, but I watched your very impressive work in pushing and leading and guiding the CSKT compact group, and you were to be vastly congratulated for that. But it's only going to happen with the tribes. How about with the provinces? Have we thought about doing something across the border? Have we thought about other states? If Wyoming would ever wake up, we might be able to work something out with them so they're not polluting the Tongue River or storing too much water in the Furek dams so that we wash out the fishery on the Bighorn River every spring, because they have to keep the levels of water high enough in the reservoir in Wyoming so that everybody can launch their boats. I don't know how we resolve that. John Tubbs and I tried at one point when we were both at the Department of the Interior, but it's amazing what you can't get done. So the next thing that I think was interesting and, to me, historically significant about the 1990s was when the legislature failed to act, or the legislature went off on a merry lark down a certain road, there were citizen initiatives. There was an initiative to ban arsenic, and it passed. And I think it was well written, although actually Lawrence and I agree initiatives and referendums generally suck as far as a way of making public policy. But I don't know that that initiative or something like it could ever pass. And why? We have Citizens United, which means you can pour all kinds of money into Montana now to let people to defeat or to pass citizen initiatives. So, what about the future? Those are some of my thoughts from the past. I think the future, at some point, the Montana Supreme Court will tell the legislature in no uncertain terms, what don't you get about exempt water wells? At one point, they're going to get fed up. And I wouldn't want to be the lawyer carrying that case, trying to explain why we need to continue having exempt water wells. I think the future, one of the things that is going to impact Montana is the negotiation or renegotiation of the Columbia River Treaty, which John Tubbs and I, who were both at the Interior at that time, worked on as well. The recognition of the extra costs for the United States and for Montana of salmon mitigation, especially, will have to be accounted for at some point. But it is an issue that talks about, you can't get around it. It's one of the most complicated, fascinating problems that we have. And it can be an opportunity to make sure that we talk about Montana sheriff and about Montana species. The next thing that we didn't have to worry about, thank God, is aquatic invasive species. Now, the response of Montana has been superlative. There has been cooperation between the parties. Everybody recognizes that this is an issue that has to be dealt with, that the societal consequences in terms of damage to hydropower, to irrigation pumps, it's incalculable. The federal government hasn't figured it out yet. Federal government's response has been tepid at best. Worthless might be another adjective. So, aquatic invasive species. The next thing is climate. Now, as managers, you folks are going to have to deal with it. Higher temperatures, faster runoff, little chance for infiltration, more precipitation in the spring months. Those are facts from the Montana Climate Assessment. Now, I don't give a rip who caused it. Although I have my own ideas. At the end of the day, those are realities. Fires are going to be more intense. They're going to burn hotter. They're going to be more wild. They're going to spread quicker. Those are the realities. So, in the future, fix it. Two more things. One, back in the 1970s, if I went to a natural resource meeting, it was old white guys. And I cannot believe how encouraging it is to see women at these meetings and people who aren't gray-haired old geezers. So that is just something that I really appreciate. And the last thing I'll leave you with is you better vote. You better tell your friends to vote, your family to vote, your cousins to vote. You better tell them to vote for people who care about rural areas in Montana and who do something beyond say they care. They might actually need to put their money where their mouth is. So there you go, the cynics of you.